Hello everyone, and welcome to Back to Ashes. My name is Phoenix. To the elite, thank you for your continuous love and support of the channel. I am deeply grateful. As we go through this video, if you like the content that you are hearing, please leave a like, comment, and please share. That way it lets YouTube know that this channel still exists and videos are uploaded 2 to 3 times a week. I am getting feedback that these videos aren't notifying people, so please help out, leave a like, and share. Oh, and of course comment. With that being said, it is time to go back to ashes. For once we arise from the ashes, we are a bigger, brighter, stronger, and a happier person every day. Sit back, relax, kick back, grab a snack, or tuck in and get warm, and prepare for your dose of vocal melatonin entitled True Crime Cases, Vol.17. Right after this intro, there will be an ad. I'll read the first case, there will be an ad, and after that, there will be no more ads within this video. Oh, and I would like to add a strong disclaimer here. These cases are quite gruesome, so if true crime is not your thing, this video will not be for you. And there will be no fluff words where fluff words should be. True crime is one of my passion, and I'm sure a lot of you out there love true crime as well. My channel is not marked safe for children, therefore we are adults, and when it comes to true crime and unsolved mysteries, I tell them in their raw form. So, some of these cases get quite gruesome. Listening discretion is now highly advised. The man who killed his sister's rapist. In June of 2020, it was reported in the media that an inmate at the Airway Heights Correctional Center in Washington had been murdered by his cellmate. 70-year-old Robert Munger was assaulted and killed by 25-year-old Shane Goldsby. However, this wasn't just a random attack. Munger was in prison for raping Goldsby's sister. In 2017, Goldsby had been arrested for stabbing somebody, stealing a Kelso police car, and taking authorities on a high-speed chase which resulted in him hitting a Washington State police car and entering a police officer who was inside the car. He was sentenced to just over 5 years. He had originally been incarcerated at Shelton before being moved to Walla Walla and in Clamlin Bay. Finally, he was transferred to Airway Heights Correctional Center in 2020. In 2019, Munger had been convicted of multiple child sex abuse charges, including child rape, child molestation, and possession of child pornography, and was sentenced to a minimum of 43 years in prison. He was ordered to serve his sentence at Airway Heights Correctional Center. When Goldsby was assigned the cell as Munger upon his arrival at the prison, he said, "This stuff doesn't happen. You're talking the same institution, the same unit, the same pod in the same cell as this dude. That's like hitting the jackpot in the casino 7 times. He said that despite the anger he felt toward Munger. He had never wanted to kill him. He questioned how and why he was transferred to the same prison and then to the same cell as the man who had sexually assaulted his younger sister. You put me in the same cell as this dude. I feel set up," he stated. According to Goldsby, he had managed to keep his composure before being tipped over the edge by comments that Munger had made. He stated that Munger started giving him lurid details about the sexual assault on his sister, even revealing that he had taken photographs and videos of her. These details were never provided to the media, indicating that Munger certainly had divulged the grim details to his victim's brother. Goldsby claimed that he had attempted to alert prison officers of the predicament he was in, but his complaints fell on deaf ears. The attack took place on the 2nd of June of 2020, and surveillance footage had captured the entire thing. Goldsby could be seen attacking Munger from behind the common area of the prison, knocking him in the ground and punching and kicking his head, as well as stomping on it. Munger would die 3 days later, and Goldsby would be charged with first-degree murder. He was ordered to be held on $500,000 bond. If convicted, he would be facing a life sentence. He would make a statement directed at his younger sister, which read in part, quote, "To my little sis, I say I love you, name redacted, so much, and I apologize about what I did. I hope I don't get life. I hope I see you again. I hope to God that I see you again. I hope to God that if I don't see you again, then you know why I did what I did. That I love you and I always will. And that I apologize that I made that choice. Just keep that head up. I love you. I always will. Get a hold of me someday." End quote. Following the murder, Janelle Guthrie, a communications director with the Washington Department of Corrections, said they were going to be conducting an investigation into the situation. The fact that the two men had been quartered together violated Department of Corrections policies. An investigation into the murder by the Washington State Patrol would find no evidence that prison staff played a role or that Goldsby or Munger had tried to warn staff about a potential conflict. The conclusions contradicted Goldsby's claim that he had attempted to alert the staff at least twice. The investigation would find that Department of Corrections staff were not aware of any connection between Goldsby and one of Munger's victims until after the attack. It also found there was no evidence to suggest that staff had arranged for the two men to share a cell because they had no knowledge of who Goldsby's sister was. As the findings of the investigation were made public, Goldsby's mother, Cindy Elliott, disputed it and said she would be seeking help to fight for her son. She stated, "Of course they're going to cover up for their own asses, and they're lying. Whether my son talked about Munger in prison or not, they knew what they were moving him into and what they were doing." She said that while she did not condone her son's actions, she said he would have never been in that cell block in the first place. In August of the following year, Goldsby would plead guilty to second-degree murder and be sentenced to 25 years for the murder. The sentencing phase would focus quite heavily on Goldsby's upbringing. His defense had wanted a more lenient sentence and cited childhood abuse. He had been abused by his drug-addicted mother, who would often chain him outside. He went through 10 different foster homes after being removed from his mother's care, but he and his mother later reconnected and began to abuse drugs together. During the sentencing phase, Goldsby addressed Munger's family and apologized for killing the sex offender. He stated, "I cannot imagine what it would be like to lose a loved one in this kind of way. To his wife and his whole family, I apologize. I am so sorry, and I hope you are able to heal from what I caused." He became emotional, and his defense lawyer finished the statement for him. "I'm ashamed of my actions. I was put in a situation that I don't wish on nobody. I got a lot of fixing to do." This next case hits close to home, and a lot of you listeners and subscribers and members have wanted to know me on a deeper personal level. I'm still here to this day, unlike this next victim. So, you wanted to get to know me just a little bit better? Here you go. On with the case. Jeanette Maples, felled by the Department of Human Services. Children are among the most vulnerable within our communities. There are systems in place whose sole purpose it is to protect these children. One would expect that when child abuse is reported to these systems, it is thoroughly investigated, even more so if multiple similar reports come in. In Eugene, Oregon, the Department of Human Services received numerous reports about a girl being abused in her home. Time and time again, they failed to do their jobs, and as a result, the abuse victim paid the ultimate price. Jeanette Maples was a 16-year-old girl living in Eugene, Oregon. She had been a student at Cascade Middle School from 2006, where she was known for her immense love of reading. However, In 2008, after graduating from the 8th grade, she became a homeschooled student registered with a Lane Education Service District. She lived at home with her mother, Angela McNulty, and Angela's husband, Richard McNulty. Just before 8 p.m. on the 9th of December of 2009, police and paramedics were called to the home in the 150 block of Howard Avenue. Inside, they discovered Jeanette, injured and unconscious in the bathtub. According to Angela, Jeanette had been asleep in the living room when she simply stopped breathing. Jeanette was rushed to Sacred Heart Medical Center at Riverbend in Springfield, but was pronounced dead on arrival. Upon first glance at Jeanette, it was evidence that she had been the victim of prolonged abuse and starvation. Dr. Daniel Davis, the pathologist who conducted the autopsy, said that Jeanette had suffered so much harm that was inflicted in so many ways that he could not determine which injury had killed her. She had also completely wasted away. There was no fat on her body and very little muscle tissue. The starvation alone could have been fatal, but there were numerous injuries all across Jeanette's body that were in various stages of healing. There were at least 200 injuries, many of which had been caused when Jeanette was struck by a manufactured object with a straight machined edge. He discovered that there was a hole in the back of Jeanette's head, which had caused bleeding on her brain. Additionally, Jeanette had pneumonia in the form of abscessed lungs that may have sent bacteria into her bloodstream, causing shock and death. The autopsy concluded that Jeanette's death came in course of, or as a result of, intentional maiming and torture. Later that night, Angela McNulty and her husband Richard McNulty were arrested and arraigned and held in the Lane County Jail. Following the arrests, Angela's two other children, 12-year-old and 5-year-old, were taken into protective custody. The arrests came to a shock to most who knew the couple. Tom, or Seppi, who had been renting the house out to the couple, said that he couldn't quite believe what they had been accused of. He described them as always coming across as extremely nice and said he had never had problems with them. Bobby Stulp, president of Raider Trucking, who had employed Richard as a truck driver for 7 years, said that Richard was always an excellent employee. However, soon enough, a grim history of abuse and torture in the household surfaced. While the family's home was being searched, investigators found a blood-stained broken ruler, 2 blood-stained belts, and tree branch switches covered in blood. They additionally discovered a flesh and blood splattered room, which was evidently where the abuse occurred. Investigators also found a piece of cardboard covered in blood. The cardboard would be placed under Jeanette as she slept on the floor so that she would not soil the carpet with her blood. When the investigators pulled up the carpet, they found that blood had flowed off the cardboard and through the carpet, and its pad staining a wooden subfloor below. Similar stains were discovered beneath the carpeting of Jeanette's room in the family's previous home as well, indicating that the abuse had been extremely prolonged. Jeanette was the only child in the household to suffer, and before taking Jeanette away for a beating, Angela would turn on a vacuum cleaner and leave it running so that her other children couldn't hear what was happening. On one occasion, Jeanette had been punched with such force that her pulverized lip needed stitches. However, Angela and Richard didn't take her to the doctors. As a result, her injuries healed from the inside out, leaving her mouth deformed by scar tissue. Far too often, Jeanette's wounds would become open and infected. One such wound on her hip was deep enough that it exposed bone. Once again, Angela and Richard didn't take Jeanette to the hospital. Instead, somebody in the home used a knife to trim away the dying tissue. Despite the fact that the house was filled with food, Jeanette had been systematically starved. In fact, the family's cat and dog ate better than Jeanette. Angela would turn off the water supply to the kitchen tap, leaving Jeanette to drink from the dog's water dish or from the toilet, and she would lock the pantry so that Jeanette couldn't steal food. Once incarcerated, Angela first of all blamed Richard and Jeanette herself for the hundreds of injuries. Over the next few hours of the interrogation, Angela changed her story numerous times. However, according to Richard and the couple's 5-year-old son, it was Angela that inflicted all of the injuries herself, while Richard did nothing to protect Jeanette. Finally, Angela confessed to hitting her daughter with the objects that had been discovered in the home. However, she did say, quote, "I spanked my daughter. I don't know how many times, but only on the bottom. I did wrong. It was horrible of me. I'm very sorry. I wished I could take it back. I didn't do the injury on the head. I know she probably died from that." In regards to the hole on Jeanette's head, Angela suggested that it come from a fall. When Richard was interrogated, he placed all of the blame on Angela. He said that Jeanette had long been singled out for mistreatment, and on Christmas and Thanksgiving, while the rest of the family were feasting, Jeanette would get a peanut butter sandwich. While her siblings slept in beds, Jeanette slept on a piece of cardboard on the floor. When birthdays rolled around each year, Jeanette's siblings would be showered with gifts, but Jeanette would receive nothing. During the interview, Richard said that in addition to the beatings, Angela would force Jeanette to stand for hours at a time with her arms raised above her head, even when she could not put weight on one foot because Angela had stomped on it. She also made Jeanette kneel with her hands behind her back for hours on end. According to Richard, he did not seek help for Jeanette because he was ailing from complications of a heart attack and was afraid of his wife. He claimed that Angela controlled the house to the point that he had to ask her to use the bathroom because she kept the door locked, and she was the only one to have a key. Investigators learned that Jeanette's step-grandmother had called a state hotline on behalf of her after she became concerned that Jeanette was being abused by Angela and Richard. Lynn McNulty was Richard's mother and Jean's step-grandmother, but she treated Jeanette like she was one of her own. In fact, Lynn had called the hotline several times, trying to get somebody to check up on Jeanette and investigate whether she was being abused in the home. Lynn had become concerned about Jeanette's well-being after she noticed that she had a split and swollen lip. When she questioned Angela and Richard about Jeanette's injuries, they had claimed that she had fallen down, but Lynn was extremely skeptical of their allegations. As she described, it looked as though Jean had been punched in the face. According to Lynn, she had initially become concerned about Jeanette before the injuries. Shortly after Jeanette was taken out of school and started homeschooling, Lynn had noticed that Jeanette was losing weight drastically and appeared to be more withdrawn. Lynn had questioned Angela regarding Jeanette's appearance and told her to get her checked out, but Angela simply responded by saying that Jeanette was fine. Lynn had relayed her fears to a close friend who had encouraged her to report potential abuse. Lynn reported potential abuse a number of times, first of which was at least several months before Jeanette was killed. The report she made was anonymous because she feared that if her son and Angela found out that it was her reporting them, she would be forbidden from seeing her grandchildren. In hindsight, Lynn said she wished she called the police, but she had believed that CPS would have done their job and checked up on Jeanette. Following the revelation, Dr. Bruce Goldberg, director of the Oregon Department of Human Services, ordered an internal investigation into whether caseworkers had any contact with the family. It is Oregon law that when a child who is known to state child welfare officials dies or is seriously injured, the Department of Health Services must convene a critical incident response team to comb through the agency's files in contact with the family in question. On the night of Jeanette's murder, Angela had called Lynn. She cried and screamed down the phone that something had happened to Jeanette. She said that she was cold and they couldn't wake her up. Lynn asked Angela if she had called 911, to which Angela said no, because she didn't want to go to jail. Lynn then demanded to speak to her son and told him he better call 911 himself or she'd be the one on the way over to the house with police. Richard complied and called 911. Lynn called back minutes later and spoke with Angela once again, and Angela told her that she had beaten Jeanette and got carried away. Later on, after Jeanette had passed away, Lynn came to the hospital where she wanted to see her body. However, law enforcement officials convinced her otherwise. They said, "You don't want to do that." They told me she weighed 50 pounds. According to Lynn, when she arrived at the hospital, her son told her that he had whipped Jeanette. He recalled, "I told my son, 'You tell the truth. You're to blame, and you're not taking the blame for something someone else did." Lynn told police that she doubted that Richard physically abused Jeanette, but said she believed that he ignored the obvious signs of her distress. She also said that 5 nights before Jeanette had died, Richard had phoned her to say that he was upset because he found Jeanette drinking from a toilet. According to Kelly Clark, who lived across the street from the family, she very rarely saw Jeanette. On the rare occasion that she spotted her, she said that she always looked down and remained silent. The last time that she saw her, which was in the summer, she said that Jeanette looked especially frail and sad. She said, "The last picture I have of her in my mind is terrifying. You don't know the guilt I'm feeling because I feel like I should have made more of an effort. I always knew something was not right in that house." Another neighbor, Diana Carson, who lived next door, told the media that she had never seen Jeanette. She wasn't even aware that she was living in the house. Jeanette's father, Anthony Maples, soon came forward. He spoke to the media and said that he had not seen or heard from Jeanette in nearly a decade. He had learned of her death and the subsequent arrest of Angela and Richard in a phone call from a social worker. "I am so crushed by this. I know that I have to accept this as God's will, but it's disgusting that this happened to my little angel," he said. By this point in the investigation, very little was known about the suspects and the victim, but detectives would soon learn that Angela had been the victim of abuse throughout her childhood. When Angela was just 4 years old, her mother had been stabbed to death. Afterwards, she and her 2 brothers were sent to live with their abusive father, who withheld food and beat them. After high school, Angela abused drugs while living a transient life, traveling around with a carnival worker. Then, in the early 1990s, Angela met Anthony, and they have 3 children together. Anthony spent most of the decade in and out of prison due to drug offense, and said that California state officials had removed their children from their home. Their 2 sons, who by at this point were 17 and 18 years old, had grown up in a foster home after they wrote a letter to the family court judge overseeing their case, pleading not to be sent back to their mother. Jeanette spent 5.5 years in foster care before officials granted Angela custody of Jeanette. By that time, Angela had another daughter, and once she gained custody of Jeanette, they moved from Sacramento Valley to Eugene. Richard had been introduced to Angela through his cousin, Mary Freeman, who had met her 13 years ago in a Catholic-run maternity home for unwed mothers in California. According to Mary, Angela had always had a short fuse when it came to Jeanette. Even when Jeanette was a young girl, Angela would pull her hair, slap her, and stuff hot peppers in her mouth. Then in 2002, Richard and Angela were married. Jeanette was enrolled in Cascade Middle School in the middle of her 6th grade year. Her classmates would recollect that she was sent in wearing tattered sweatpants and an old yellowing t-shirt, and a number of pupils made fun of her. While Jeanette was often teased about her clothing and her appearance, she truly loved school, in particular, reading books and poetry. However, there were signs of trouble. Jeanette constantly was hungry, and when it came time to go home, Jeanette would become withdrawn and anxious. In mid-December, both Angela and Richard were formally indicted on charges of first-degree murder. Lawyers entered not guilty pleas on behalf of both of them. Meanwhile, a public memorial for Jeanette was held in Springfield. Around 100 people, including relatives, friends, and strangers, gathered for the memorial. Jeanette had been a keen writer, and during the memorial, one of her pieces was read out. "The final place I would use my wings to go to is to go really high and even higher to heaven. I would visit the angels, and I would visit my grandma Nancy and everyone else in the family. And after, I would go to Hawaii and France and Portugal in the beautiful heaven. I would use my wings to fly home." The memorial included a slideshow depicting photographs of Jeanette at different stages in her short life. Afterwards, Lynn said, "That was all for her. I don't think she ever had anything in her life that was just for her. I think that all she ever wanted was for her mother to love her." The murder, as well as the grim history of the family, truly put a cloud over Eugene. Friends, family members, neighbors, store clerks, and anybody else who had come into contact with the family all had to grapple with the idea that they missed the signs of abuse. It would soon be revealed that Lynn wasn't the only person to report fears of abuse in the McNulty home. A concerned parent of a friend and former teachers had called DHS. Some reported that she was constantly bruised and hungry, while others had reported they had confided in them that she had been beaten at home. Back when Jeanette was in school still, she tried unsuccessfully to hide the constant cluster of bruises she had all across her body. However, it was during gym class that most people would notice she had a myriad of bruises, all in different stages of healing. Jeanette would shrug the injuries off, saying she had simply fallen over. But there was one girl who knew the truth. Jeanette had confided in her friend, Amber Davis, that her mother had been abusing her. Amber told her parents, who contacted DHS. However, DHS downplayed her mother's concerns and told her that secondhand accounts of abuse were not sufficiently serious to send social workers out. Amber next told school officials in 2007, and they contacted DHS. In fact, Cascade Middle School officials had contacted DHS twice while Jeanette was still a student. "It's hard to understand," I told. "Everybody told. And nothing happened," said Amber. DHS officials still hadn't publicly responded to the allegations, but that was because they had convened a critical incident response team review to examine how the agency had handled the case. Jeanette's death followed 5 years of critical incident reviews into child deaths and serious injuries of children who had contact with DHS. Since 2004, 21 reports had identified a number of problems, including a failure to investigate and follow up on cases, inadequate documentation, and lack of ongoing assessment. Towards the end of January, a state report was released, which concluded that DHS workers had repeatedly failed to help Jeanette. According to the report, the case was not adequately investigated or referred for assessment, despite the fact that there were 4 separate calls alleging abuse and neglect over 4 years. The report noted that the family was a high-risk family with a past history with a child welfare agency that included physical abuse and neglect. The agency had records of 2 abuse complaints in 2006, 1 in 2007, and another in 2009. The first report from 2006 came when a state child abuse call taker received a report of mental injury and neglect involving Jeanette. Investigators looked into the allegation but couldn't determine whether Jeanette was in danger. The report deemed this investigation was inadequate. Department policy requires that an investigator respond to such allegations within 24 hours. Instead, however, the call was classified as low priority. Furthermore, the investigator on the case should have interviewed witnesses about the abuse allegation before closing the case. Then, in 2007 and 2009, DHS failed to refer the abuse allegations to Child Protection Services. Each of these reports were designated closed as screening, which meant that they weren't investigated at all. Aaron Kelly Seal, the director of Department's Children's, Adults, and Families Division, said that the case was tragic but rare and was not representative of the system. Following the grim revelation, DHS announced that they would be paying greater attention to child abuse reports involving older children and isolated youths. They also announced that they would require workers to make several visits to the home of a reported abuse victim within a 30-day period. Is that child being raised outside of traditional community supports, which Jeanette was considering she was isolated and homeschooled? In early August, it was announced that prosecutors would not be seeking the death penalty for Richard. However, capital punishment was still on the table for Angela, who would be facing trial first. Then, in February of 2011, Angela pleaded guilty to aggravated murder. She additionally pleaded guilty to destroying or altering physical evidence in the case. It was now up to a Lane County jury to decide whether she should face the death penalty, life in prison without parole, or life in prison with the possibility of parole after 30 years. Her guilty plea was not part of any plea bargain. According to her defense attorney, Stephen Krasick, he had reached a deal sparing Angela her life, but the Lane County District Attorney's Office was unsparing in its refusal to consider such an agreement. Under Oregon law, the death penalty requires a unanimous decision by the jury. After a week of painstaking jury selection, it was time for the defense and prosecution to present evidence to the panel of jury members. The prosecution detailed how Angela went to great lengths to conceal her systematic starvation and abuse of Jeanette. According to District Attorney Eric Hasselman, Angela pulled Jeanette out of school after school officials suspected that Jeanette was being abused. Furthermore, Angela had lied to put off a state caseworker who had come out to investigate. Dr. Daniel Davis took to the stand to go through Jeanette's injuries. Dr. Elizabeth Hilton, who pronounced Jeanette dead at the hospital, told jurors that she had never seen a more malnourished patient or an abuse victim with so many injuries. The first responders also testified about Angela's odd behavior when they arrived at the scene. As Captain Sven Eric Walrus said, "It was one of those feelings on the back of my neck that something was absolutely not right. I wanted to run away." According to Captain Walrus, it was the first time in his 18-year career that he cried after his shift. According to forensic investigator Tracy Rose, somebody had attempted to clean the torture room before Jeanette was taken to hospital. However, blood was still all over the room, spattered from floor to ceiling, on two walls, and between tiles of parquet wood on the floor. The blood was Jeanette's. A state police crime lab supervisor testified later. Richard was called to testify during the sentencing hearing. He told the jury that he didn't know that his wife was beating and starving Jeanette until a few months before her death. Richard admitted that he had a part to play in Jeanette's death because he failed to stop the abuse or seek help for Jeanette. "I did nothing. "I failed as a father," he acknowledged. According to Richard, when Angela discovered that Jeanette was dead, she first of all suggested burying her in the backyard or in the Coast Range. He persuaded her to call his mother, Lynn, for advice. It was Richard who eventually called 911, and afterwards, he claimed that Angela wanted to flee, stating, "I did something bad, and they're going to put me away for a very, very long time." Richard told the jury that he wasn't aware Jeanette had been abused for so long because his job as a truck driver kept him away from the home at weeks on end. Then, when he had a heart attack in July of 2009, he was home a lot more often to recuperate. He admitted that he failed to give Jeanette food or water, even though they were left alone regularly while Angela went shopping or drove the other kids to school. He acknowledged that just 4 days before her death, Jeanette had sought his help. She invited him into the bedroom where the abuse occurred and pointed out all the blood as well as the weapons Angela used to beat her. "I looked at that bedroom, and it was horrifying. I seen blood splattered everywhere. Jeanette told me her mom would have her stripped naked and lay there directly on the floor and would whip her. I was scared. I was terrified. I didn't know it had gotten that far." Richard took the jury through the final attack on Jeanette. He described how the night before Jeanette's death, Angela came to him upset, saying that she'd gone too far by hitting Jeanette's head with a stick. The following morning, Jeanette was cold to the touch and was speaking incoherently, as if she had taffy in her mouth. Instead of calling 911, Angela enlisted her younger daughter to help clean up the blood before heading out to McDonald's. At around 7 p.m., Angela informed Richard that Jeanette was ice cold and wouldn't wake up. Next to testify was Jeanette's sister, who was now 13 years old. She told the jury that the harsh treatment of Jeanette began as soon as Angela regained custody of her at age 7. The sister said that days before Jeanette's death, Angela had shown her a hold on the back of Jeanette's head and told her, "If someone was stabbed in the back of the head with a branch, it would cause brain damage." She described how, by that point, Jeanette was acting kind of strange. She said that Jeanette mumbled incoherently and couldn't stand. She additionally said that both Angela and Richard had punished Jeanette by depriving her of food and water, hitting her with shoes and their fists. This statement contradicted Richard's earlier statement that he had caused Jeanette's death by failing to protect her, but said he never injured her himself. The sister also testified that Angela would order her to gather the dog's feces from the backyard and would then smear them over Jeanette's face. Once all testimony had been heard, Angela had the opportunity to address the jury. She acknowledged that she had abused Jeanette, but added, "I did not want my little girl to die." In closing arguments, District Attorney Hasselman reminded jurors that they had all pledged during jury selection that they would not hesitate to impose the death penalty simply because Angela is a woman. If Jeanette Maples had been snatched by someone else and held captive in their home, if the atrocities that she experienced both psychologically and physically had been inflicted by a stranger, would any of us have a serious question if death would be the appropriate sentence? Is it somehow mitigating that her killer was her mother? In fact, he said it aggravated the crime by taking away from Jeanette that glimmer of hope that she would be rescued by her parents. Now, it was time for the Lane County Circuit Court jurors to begin deliberating on whether to sentence Angela to death or to life in prison. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury decided that Angela should be sentenced to death for torturing and killing Jeanette. She was the first woman in Oregon to receive a death sentence since capital punishment was restored in 1984. As the sentence was read out, Angela appeared stoic, but several jurors wept. Then, in early April, Richard pleaded guilty to murder by abuse for failing to protect Jeanette. He was sentenced to Oregon's mandatory sentence for murder by abuse. Life in prison with no chance to even seek parole until 25 years. His defense attorney cited his low IQ, his inexperience making decisions for himself, and severe health problems as explanations for why he did not prevent Jeanette's death. Attorney Gordon Mallon also asserted that Richard would never have been involved in such a crime had he not met and married Angela. Richard decided not to make a statement, stating that he had trouble articulating his feelings, but said that he regretted failing to save the girl he allegedly considered his daughter. Following the verdict, Portland lawyer David Paul filed a wrongful death and personal injury suit against the Oregon Department of Human Services for $1.5 million in damages on behalf of Jeanette's estate. The suit alleged that state officials could have prevented her death had caseworkers exercised reasonable care in responding to reports that Jeanette was being abused. The suit was filed on behalf of Anthony, Jeanette's father, who had not seen his daughter in almost a decade. He was seeking damages for loss of his daughter's society, love, and companionship. Much of the community found this quite inappropriate and thought that if anybody should receive compensation for suffering, it was Jeanette's siblings, or Lynn, who had reported the abuse. As a matter of fact, Anthony hadn't even bothered to come to his daughter's memorial service. In March of 2012, the state of Oregon agreed to pay $1.5 million to Anthony. $500,000 of that went to his attorney in attorney fees, while Anthony received the rest. Many had hoped that Anthony would consider establishing a trust fund to meet the future needs to Jeanette's siblings, who were in foster care. Another hope was that he would give it to the Jeanette Maples Project in Lane County that were working to promote awareness of child abuse. Anthony kept the money for himself. In July of 2019, it was announced that Senior Circuit Court Jude Burdett Pratt announced that he would be throwing out Angela's murder conviction because her attorneys failed to adequately represent or advise her during her trial. Defense attorneys Stephen Kraslick and Kenneth Hadley made the highly unusual move of encouraging Angela to plead guilty when the prosecution had not agreed to drop the death penalty as a possible punishment. The judge ruled that Angela should have a new trial. Then in August of 2020, a settlement was made which ruled Angela should serve life in prison without parole. The grim death of Jeanette Maples defied any attempt at understanding. The murder trials did very little to answer the baffling question as to why Jeanette was singled out. As she stood in that torture position, she must have spent hours upon hours wondering why it was only her as she watched the rest of her family eat at the dinner table, watch TV, play in the garden, go trick-or-treating, and celebrate birthdays. While there had been several reports to DHS over the years, Jeanette lived her final moments in such obscurity and isolation that nobody outside of her family could have fathomed that she was being slowly tortured to death. The most chilling aspect of this case, however, is the notion that it could have been prevented, that Jeanette could have been saved if just one person acted on those reports. The Satanic Sacrifice of Elise Poller. On the 22nd of July 1995, 15-year-old Elise Poller was reported missing from her home in Arroyo Grande, California. Elise was a freshman at Arroyo Grande High School when she vanished without a trace. The case would go cold for 8 months, but in 1996, somebody came forward with a confession. 17-year-old Royce Casey contacted the police and led them to Elise's body. Her partially mummified remains were splayed out in a south eucalyptus grove located around a corner of a mile from her home. Elise had been strangled and stabbed to death. She had been stabbed a total of 12 times, but none of the stab wounds were fatal. She died by slowly bleeding to death. In addition to Casey, 2 other teenagers, 16-year-old Jacob Delashmutt and 15-year-old Joshua Fiorella, were arrested and charged with murder, gang involvement, rape, torture, and conspiracy. Following the arrests, prosecutors would reveal that the 3 teenagers had formed a musical group to glorify Satan and earn a ticket to hell. They were accused of killing Elise to commit the ultimate sin against God by sacrificing a virgin. They believed that in killing Elise, the success of their band, named Hatred, would improve. The murder plot had been concocted by Fiorella and Delashmutt, according to Casey. They picked Elise in particular for their victim because she was a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, reputed virgin. They thought these specific characteristics would make her murder the ultimate sin against God. Over the course of the weeks leading up to Elise's disappearance, Delashmutt, Fiorella, and Casey had stalked Elise. On the night of the murder, they lured Elise out to the eucalyptus grove, Nipabone Mesa, under the promise of giving her drugs. Here, the foursome smokes marijuana before Delashmutt put a belt around Elise's neck. She was raped and tortured by the trio. Delashmutt strangled Elise with the belt, while Fiorella stabbed her in the neck with a hunting knife they had brought along. Afterwards, Delashmutt and Casey took turns stabbing her. As Elise was being murdered, she begged for help. She called out to her mother and to Jesus. Her pleas fell on deaf ears. As she lay bleeding to death, the trio beat and kicked her. Casey admitted to police that Elise was on the ground praying to God and calling for her mom. Police believed that they then raped the corpse of Elise. They determined this by the disposition of her body. Fiorella's mother had told police that he had told her Delashmutt and Casey had committed necrophilia, while one of Delashmutt's friends told police that he had boasted of returning to Elise's body to have sex with it. In the aftermath of the murder, Elise's family would file a lawsuit against the band, Slayer, alleging that their lyrics had incited the teenagers to murder Elise. They were seeking monetary damages as well as a halt to the practice of marketing violent music toward juveniles. Ultimately, the lawsuit was thrown out. Slayer lyrics are repulsive and profane, but they do not direct or instruct listeners to commit the acts that resulted in the vicious torture murder of Elise Poller, wrote Judge Burke. Fiorella would reach a plea agreement in which he pleaded guilty to first-degree murder in exchange for a sentence of life in prison with a minimum of 26 years. At the sentencing phase, Elise's father, David Poller, said, "Joseph, it's a parent's worst fear and lifetime pain to outlive their child. It's even worse knowing she was murdered, tortured, and raped as a virgin, sacrificed on the altar of Satan so that you can earn a ticket to hell." Casey pleaded no contest to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 21 years. Delashmutt also pleaded no contest to first-degree murder and was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 26 years. In 2021, Casey had a shot at parole. Some members of Elise's family, including her father, said that they did not oppose to the release. Casey was said to express sincere remorse over the murder and had been the one to confess and lead police to her body. In prison, he had a 20-year record of model behavior and participated in a number of rehabilitation programs, earned his GED, and was working towards a bachelor's degree in psychology and sociology. During his parole hearing, he described Elise as a truly wonderful person. He said that while behind bars, He had learned self-acceptance, and that when he was a teenager, he had a desire to portray an image of being violent. He stated that when he thinks of Elise, he thinks how immense the suffering is what I caused, that Elise doesn't have her life anymore because of me. He added, she had to feel so much pain while I was murdering her. Casey would be granted parole by the California Parole Board. However, San Luis Obispo County District Attorney Dan Dow wrote a letter to the governor opposing the release. In the letter, he wrote that Casey has never adequately explained why he participated in such a sadistic and heinous crime. Ultimately, Governor Gavin Newsom would deny the grant of parole, reversing the parole board decision. All three men remain incarcerated. It has been reported that the murder of Elise Poller inspired the 2009 movie, Jennifer's Body. A mother's unthinkable crime. James Hutchinson. It was around 10:15 a.m. on Sunday morning, the 28th of February 2021, when a couple went to Middletown Police Station in Ohio. They were 29-year-old Brittany Gosney and her boyfriend, 42-year-old James Hamilton. They informed police that Gosney's 6-year-old son, James Hutchinson, was missing. They said that they had awoken in the morning to find that James was missing from their home. They explained that they had searched for James for a couple of hours, but to no avail, and then came down to the police station. James was a first-grade student at Rosa Parks Elementary School. The principal of the school, Tracy Neely, said that James was a happy and outgoing student. He was a real lovable little boy and would greet his teachers every morning with a massive hug. Even when he returned to school with the COVID protocols in place, James always tried to sneak in a hug, or at the very least, a high five. James was described as a white male standing at around 3 feet tall and weighing around 42 pounds. He had red hair and blue eyes. According to Gosney, her son was wearing a red shirt with blue and red Batman pajama bottoms. Straight away, police were suspicious of Gosney and Hamilton. When they came in to report James missing, they both had conflicting versions of events when it came to the last time that they had seen James. It appeared as though they couldn't quite get their story straight, so police separated them and spoke to them individually. It wouldn't take long until the truth finally came out, and it was more horrific than anybody could have ever imagined. When investigators momentarily left the room, Hamilton could be heard asking himself, "Man, why did this boy have to do this? James, why do you do stupid stuff?" In the other interrogation room, investigators were speaking with Gosney, and her fake story had begun to unravel. After sticking to her story for several hours, Gosney finally told investigators that at around 3 a.m. on Saturday morning, she drove James and his two siblings, who were 9 years old and 7 years old, to Rush Run Wildlife Area in Somerville. Gosney wasn't taking her children there for an early morning day trip. She explained that she took James and his siblings to the relatively isolated area to either scare them or abandon them. She pulled over in the parking lot and ordered the 3 children out of the van. She said that James had reached out and held on to the van door handle, presumably trying to get back into the van. It was late at night, dark, and the idea of being out in the wilderness alone would be terrifying for most adults, never mind children. James grabbed a hold of the door handle and clung on for life, while Gosney drove off at a high rate of speed, dragging him for some distance. Gosney explained that James eventually let go of the handle, and she continued to drive. She said she returned to the scene at around 30 to 40 minutes later, and said that she found James dead in the middle of the parking lot. He had sustained a head injury. She ordered the 2 other children to get back in the van and bundled James's lifeless body back in the car. She told the investigators that she had placed James's body in the van, nice and softly. When they got home, she took him upstairs and placed him in the bedroom, while the other two children went to bed. When they were asleep, Gosney and Hamilton drove James's body from the home to Lawrenceburg in Indiana, which was around an hour away. Here, they pulled over on the I-275 bridge and threw his body into the Ohio River after weighing it down with a concrete block. She opened up further, providing more poignant details of James's last moments on Earth. She told the investigators that when she pulled up in the parking lot, James didn't want to get out. His two siblings got out, but he refused. She stated, "I was like, get out. I told the kids I was sorry. The older kids were the only ones who got out." She said that James replied, "Mommy, I don't want to be here." He eventually got out of the van, but he kept trying to open the back door to climb back in. She confessed that she knew she dragged James as he clung to the handle. She explained that she couldn't hear much because she had the music on loud, but said that at one point, she heard the children screaming and heard a noise but didn't stop to investigate what this noise was, or investigate whether James was okay. She simply continued to drive before eventually returning. Hamilton eventually came clean as well. He stressed that he had not been with Gosney when she killed James, but admitted that they had both taken the children out to Rush Run beforehand and dropped the children off as a scare tactic and a form of punishment. With the gruesome revelation, investigators would embark on the Ohio River to begin the search for James. They were assisted by trained searchers, but the water levels were extremely high, and the water was treacherous, which hampered the search. Gosney and Hamilton were both arrested. Gosney was charged with murder, abuse of a corpse, and tampering with evidence, while Hamilton was charged with abuse of a corpse and tampering with evidence. Gosney's bond was set at $1 million, and Hamilton was set at $100,000. Police Chief David Burke said that Gosney has not shown any remorse for her actions. He said during the press conference, "This has really touched my soul and my heart. My kids are older, but my youngest is 16. But I'm just sitting here, you know. The poor 6-year-old boy had no idea what was going on and what's happening. And for the other kids to go through this too, it's just heartbreaking." As news of James's murder swept through the media, tributes for him would come in. The principal at his school, Tracy Neely, sent out a statement on the Monday morning. It read, "We all are mourning the loss of our friend James today. James was a happy and joyful soul who loved school. On the days he was in class, he would give hugs to all of his teachers as he walked into school. On Monday night, a vigil was held at Garner Park in Middleton. Hundreds of people would show up to pay tribute to James, including his father, Lewis Hutchinson. At the vigil, Lewis said to the crowd, 'I don't even know how to process all of this. He was just my world.' The community would light candles, hold a moment of silence, and then release balloons into the air. A celebration of life was held in James's honor at Barnett Stadium, right beside Rosa Parks Elementary School. The stadium was filled to the brim. Alongside the podium was a large painting of James. It had been painted by high school students in Rick Crabb's art class. Prosecutors would reveal that in days leading up to James's murder, both Gosney and Hamilton had hogtied the hands and legs of both James and his two siblings, and then placed cloths into their mouths and left them in this position in a closet for several hours. The family have lived quite a transient lifestyle, bouncing from area to area and from hotel to hotel. Hamilton didn't have a job and had a lengthy criminal record, which spanned decades. In 1999, he was convicted of burglary, and then in 2005, he was convicted on a weapons charge. These were both felony convictions. Gosney also had a fourth child, but years earlier, the child had been removed from her care, placed into foster care, and then subsequently adopted. It was quite similar to Gosney's own background. She had lived with her father and his girlfriend, but when she was 12 years old, she was removed by Hamilton County Children's Services. As investigators were trying to establish a motive, Gosney would provide one. She claimed that for some reason, Hamilton had been pressuring her to get rid of James and his two siblings. She said that Hamilton beat the children and had tied them up. Gosney's court-appointed defense lawyer, David Washington, would file a motion seeking an insanity plea for his client. However, towards the end of April, Gosney was found competent to stand trial and the insanity plea was withdrawn. The psychologist's report revealed that Gosney was a childhood sexual assault survivor. It read in part, "It was also noted that she did not appear to present with distress as she discussed the offenses charged, including the death of her youngest child instead, discussing this in a matter-of-fact manner and presenting with no emotional attachment to others." As Gosney's trial date was fast approaching, she appeared in court in mid-August. During the court hearing, she unexpectedly pleaded guilty to murder and to 2 counts of felony child endangerment. The guilty plea had been part of a plea agreement in which the remaining 13 counts against Gosney were dismissed. Hamilton would follow suit, appearing in court shortly thereafter to plead guilty to kidnapping, gross abuse of a corpse, and 2 counts of child endangering. Brittany Gosney would be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 21 years. It was the maximum sentence that could be handed down. Before the sentence was handed down by Judge Powers, Gosney was asked twice if she had anything to say. Both times, she said no. Outside of court, the prosecutor touched on this and underlined what he said was a lack of remorse. He stated, "Did any of you hear the words, 'I am sorry'? Did any of you hear, 'I apologize for this', to the people of Butler County and to the nation who have followed this case?" James Hamilton was sentenced to a minimum of 15 years in prison and a maximum of 19 years, and was ordered to register as a child victim offender and a violent offender once released. Before the sentence was handed down, Hamilton read from a piece of paper. He apologized for his actions, said that he felt remorse, and expressed his hopes for James's body to be recovered from the Ohio River. It was revealed that the hard drive Gosney and Hamilton had disposed of was recovered. It showed Gosney leaving the residence that night with her 3 children in tow. At 4:53 a.m., the van returns. Gosney gets out of the car carrying the lifeless body of James. He only had 1 shoe. One of his siblings trails behind carrying his other shoe. A bench memorializing James was placed at his former elementary school. The bench contained a photograph of James smiling on the back, alongside the words, "The greatest thing we can do is help somebody know that they are loved and capable of loving." Since James's body had not been recovered, the bench symbolizes something close to a gravestone. And that, there, listeners, brings a close to these True Crime Cases, Volume 17. I would like to express my condolences to the families who have been affected by their devastating loss. I hope they can find some comfort in the happier times and in their higher power. To the rest of the members of Back to Ashes, thank you so much for your dedication. As I always like to say, without you, I don't have a voice, and Back to Ashes doesn't exist. Thank you, thank you, thank you. If you are new to the channel and you enjoy what you're hearing, please leave a like and comment. And to everyone else, please like, comment, and share this video. That way it lets YouTube know that you enjoy Back to Ashes. And for the newbies, of course, swinging it back around to you. If you would love to become part of the family, hit that subscribe button and set your bell to all. That way you'll know every time I upload a video. If you are sleeping, I hope Slumberland is treating you comfortably. If you're awake, I hope you've enjoyed this selection. Until next time, please take care of yourselves and please stay vigilant. I'll be reading to you soon. Have yourselves a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening. Peace, love, and light to you all.